Has there ever been a machine that was killed for being too powerful? The Detroit Diesel 8V92 wasn't just an engine, it was a legend, roaring down highways, hauling tens of thousands of pounds across America, leaving behind a trail of smoke and myth. This was an engine so beloved that people could recognize it by sound alone. It was strong, durable, simple, and for a time, unbeatable. So why has it vanished completely from the world of long-haul trucking? Was the 8V92 betrayed by its own strength? Or was it simply a victim of a world that changed too fast? With new laws, new tech, and mounting environmental pressures. In this video, we'll explore the glorious rise and heartbreaking fall of one of the greatest machines ever built in America, the Detroit Diesel 8V92. Since the 1930s, Detroit Diesel had been developing two-stroke engine technology, but it wasn't until World War II that the technology truly entered its golden age. Partnering with the US Navy, Detroit put its designs to the test under the harshest conditions, warships running non-stop for months at sea, where failure wasn't an option. After the war, the technology didn't sit idle. It found new purpose in marine and heavy-duty transportation. The Series 92 engines, especially the 6V92, quickly became ideal choices for buses and some large trucks, thanks to their strong torque, high durability, and manageable operating costs. But Detroit Diesel wasn't done. Their engineers knew they could push the envelope even further. And from that ambition came the Detroit 8V92, not simply a 6V92 with 2 extra cylinders, but a bold leap forward. With 736 cubic inches of displacement, this V8 two-stroke engine was a rare beast in the trucking world. Each cylinder produced around 53 horsepower, giving the engine a total output of up to 425 horsepower and over 1,400 pound-feet of torque in its most powerful versions. But what made the 8V92 special wasn't just the numbers, it was how it delivered that power. Unlike four-stroke engines, where each cylinder fires once every 2 revolutions, the two-stroke design of the 8V92 meant every cylinder fired on every revolution. That translated into near-instant torque, making heavy loads feel effortless. Whether climbing steep grades or cruising the highway, the 8V92 delivered a relentless pull across the rev range. Another key reason it was beloved: simplicity and serviceability. Its modular design, featuring wet-sleeve cylinder liners, allowed mechanics to replace liners roadside. No need to pull the entire engine. For independent drivers and small fleet operators, this meant real savings in downtime and repair costs. And then there was the sound. The iconic roar of the 8V92, pushed through its massive Roots blower supercharger, was unmistakable. Drivers could identify it from miles away. It wasn't just the sound of horsepower, it was the sound of freedom, of America on the open road. In short, the 8V92 was a fusion of raw mechanical muscle, legendary durability, and incredible practicality. And then, when it finally hit America's open highways, that's when the entire trucking industry realized this wasn't just an engine. It was the beginning of a new era. The Detroit 8V92 didn't just produce torque, it ignited excitement, trust, and pride in the hands of those behind the wheel. Independent drivers quickly spread the word. If you've got an 8V92, you can haul anything, anywhere. During the post-deregulation trucking boom of the late 70s and early 80s, this engine became the default choice for thousands of owner-operators. They didn't just want power, they needed something tireless, and the 8V92 answered that call. Its popularity spread through truck stops, magazine covers, parking lots, and the hearts of American drivers. It wasn't uncommon to see 8V92 keychains or Detroit Iron decals proudly displayed like badges of honor. For fleet owners, the 8V92 was a financial asset. Fewer breakdowns, easy repairs, and liners that could be swapped roadside meant less downtime and more money. In an industry where every idle hour is lost revenue, the 8V92 defined efficient operation. By the early 1980s, Detroit Diesel had captured over 40% of the U.S. heavy-duty truck engine market, an enormous feat. But even at the height of its success, a paradox began to surface. The very trait that made the 8V92 great, its raw power, was also what put it under increasing scrutiny. Fuel economy was the first red flag. Yes, the two-stroke 8V92 was powerful, but it was also incredibly thirsty. While four-stroke competitors were achieving 6 to 7 miles per gallon, the 8V92 struggled to get 4 to 5 miles per gallon even under optimal conditions. When diesel was cheap, few cared. But as fuel prices rose and operating costs became a critical concern for fleet owners, the 8V92 started to look like a gas-guzzling liability. It wasn't just fuel either. The engine also consumed more lubricating oil and required more frequent maintenance compared to its four-stroke rivals. The two-stroke design delivered brute strength, but it came at the cost of efficiency and emissions cleanliness. And then, a quiet challenger emerged: modern four-stroke engine technology. With advancements like electronic fuel injection, high-efficiency turbocharging, and computer-controlled engine management, these engines began to match the power of the 8V92, but with far better fuel economy and much lower emissions. Detroit Diesel realized that the next battle wouldn't be fought over horsepower or torque. It would be about total cost of ownership, fuel efficiency, and compliance with tightening environmental regulations. And it was a battle where the two-stroke design was starting to fall behind. So, a wave of improvements began. The company rolled out updated versions of the 8V92 featuring electronic fuel injection, Detroit Diesel electronic controls, and even twin-turbo configurations to boost performance and cut fuel use. On paper, these upgrades promised a cleaner, more efficient engine. But reality was more complicated. With every upgrade, the 8V92 lost a piece of its soul. An engine once celebrated for its simplicity and mechanical ease became more complex, harder to fix, harder to diagnose. Worse yet, the costs went up. For many drivers, especially owner-operators, the engine no longer felt familiar or easy to live with. It was a bitter irony. In order to survive, the 8V92 had to change. But the more it changed, the more it lost what people loved about it. Despite Detroit's efforts to modernize it, the physical limits of the two-stroke design became undeniable. And as four-stroke competitors grew increasingly sophisticated, the 8V92 was becoming outdated in a game where the rules were about to change completely. That change was no longer hypothetical. It had a name: the EPA. And it was federal emissions regulations that would ultimately deal the 8V92 its final blow. Throughout the 1970s, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency focused mostly on passenger cars. But by the mid-1980s, heavy-duty trucks entered the spotlight. The 8V92, with its inherently dirty, two-stroke design, quickly became a prime target. The problem lay in its scavenging process. During combustion, some unburned fuel would escape with the exhaust gases. This led to significantly higher hydrocarbon and particulate emissions compared to four-stroke rivals. And because the engine required oil to be mixed with the fuel, it emitted thick blue smoke, a signature of Detroit iron that was now seen as an environmental red flag. In 1988, the EPA introduced the first heavy-duty truck emissions standards. But that was just the beginning. Each subsequent regulation became tougher, and by 1994, the new thresholds were physically unachievable for a two-stroke design like the 8V92. To comply, Detroit Diesel would have needed to redesign the entire combustion cycle, intake, exhaust, and add complex after-treatment systems. But doing so would mean destroying everything that made the 8V92 great: its simplicity, power, and ease of maintenance. Detroit had no real choice left. They stood at a painful crossroads: invest hundreds of millions to save a fading legend, or accept the inevitable and step into a new era. And in 1993, Detroit Diesel made a decision that sent shockwaves through the entire industry. They would discontinue the 8V92 and phase out their entire line of two-stroke engines for heavy-duty trucks. An era that had just been celebrated was officially brought to a close. It wasn't an easy decision. Detroit had invested decades and hundreds of millions of dollars into two-stroke technology. The 8V92 was still a bestseller, and the driver community, especially owner-operators, still saw it as an irreplaceable road companion. But company leadership understood that the future had no room for outdated designs. Instead of patching things together, they chose to reposition the brand around a new generation of four-stroke engines, cleaner, more efficient, and fit for the 21st century. The community's reaction was far from quiet. Many drivers felt abandoned. Some rushed to buy the last trucks equipped with the 8V92, hoping to hold on to a piece of the legend before it vanished. In the early years, Detroit's new four-stroke engines faced their fair share of issues, further fueling nostalgia for the simplicity and durability of the 8V92. The company's market share dropped as customers turned to Cummins, Caterpillar, and international brands. But Detroit persisted, because they knew no one could live in the past forever. The final 8V92 rolled off the production line in 1995. It wasn't just the end of a product, it was a quiet period at the end of an era of wild, mechanical, and deeply emotional American trucking. Even nearly 30 years after production ended, the 8V92 still lives on in the hearts of enthusiasts. At vintage truck shows, that familiar roar still stops crowds in their tracks. On online forums, owners still share tips for restoring and preserving every bolt, like they're safeguarding a piece of the soul of the American trucking industry. From a technical standpoint, the 8V92 was the pinnacle of two-stroke diesel engineering for long-haul trucks. Its modular design, high output, and ability to run for 1 million miles set benchmarks that influenced standards not just in the US, but around the world. And beyond the numbers, the 8V92 became a symbol of freedom, power, trust, and the bittersweet truth that sometimes something truly great simply doesn't belong in a world that's moved on. The Detroit 8V92 was once the beating heart of American trucking, not just for its power, but for the spirit it carried: rugged, simple, and fearless in the face of any road. And even though the world has moved on, many of us still remember that signature roar as a piece of history that refuses to fade. Have you ever seen or heard a truck running the 8V92 in real life? Do you believe engines like these could ever make a comeback, or are they destined to live only in museums and the hearts of enthusiasts? Share your story, your memories, or your thoughts about the 8V92 in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into mechanical history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you won't miss the next legend we uncover.